On July 14, 2021, investigators in a small county in the state of Mississippi were deep into a missing persons case. A 20-year-old college student, Celaya Moore, who had vanished 48 hours earlier without a trace. Her phone was off. No signs of forced entry at her apartment. And yet, those closest to her suspected something more sinister. Detectives were working off a series of leads when a search team was dispatched to an isolated stretch of Highway 27. Acting on cell phone data and other investigative findings, officers scoured the wooded area near the roadway. That's when they found it. A black trash bag, partially torn, hidden near the tree line. When opened, it confirmed their worst fears. Dismembered human remains. The body was soon identified as Celaya Moore, 20 years old, missing for only 2 days. But what investigators would soon uncover made this case even darker than a random killing. Celaya had been secretly involved with a powerful man, a man twice her age, a man with a wife, children, and a reputation to protect. Sheriff Nazir Reddick. The affair had been going on for months, but when Celaya decided she was done being a secret, everything spiraled. She had started leaving clues for his wife, and she had even reached out to someone at a local newspaper. But before she could expose the truth, she was silenced. And now Sheriff Reddick had to cover his tracks. But could he? Welcome to Unheard Crimes Corner. Before we dive into this shocking case, remember, evil thrives in the shadows, and the only way to fight it is by bringing it to light. Share this video, like it, and make sure it reaches as many people as possible. The more we expose these crimes, the more we help others stay aware, stay safe, and never fall victim to such horrors. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Because there are always more cases that demand to be uncovered. For nearly a decade, Sheriff Nazir Reddick was the most respected man in his county. At 48 years old, he was a man of discipline, authority, and unwavering control. His name carried weight. People trusted him. His deputies admired him. His wife, Jalia, stood beside him like a symbol of his perfect life. But perfection was a lie. For months, Reddick had been living a double life. A reckless affair with 20-year-old Celaya Moore, a college student half his age, someone who had no idea what kind of man she was dealing with. In March 2021, Celaya was volunteering at a county fundraiser, one of those boring political events meant to boost community morale. Sheriff Reddick was there as the guest of honor. He noticed her immediately. She was young, vibrant, different. She had that boldness, the kind of fearlessness that came with being young and unaware of danger. And most importantly, she looked at him differently than everyone else did. She wasn't intimidated by his badge or his reputation. She was intrigued, and that was all it took. What started as casual flirtation turned into something deeper. At first it was harmless. A few extra minutes of conversation, lingering eye contact, a few inside jokes. Then came the excuses to see each other. By April 2021, their meetings had become frequent, intentional, and dangerous. Late-night drives, secret hotel rooms, private phone calls that lasted hours. For Reddick, it was an escape. For Celaya, it was excitement. She wasn't just dating any man, she was dating the sheriff. A man twice her age, a man with power, a man who made her feel important. But powerful men don't like losing control. And Celaya had no idea how dangerous Nazir Reddick really was, because once she started wanting more, things would take a deadly turn. Celaya Moore had never been the kind of girl to sit quietly in the background. She was confident, ambitious, and fully aware of the effect she had on people, especially men. When she first met Sheriff Nazir Reddick, she hadn't planned on anything serious. It was fun at first, the thrill of sneaking around with a man who carried power in every room he walked into. The secret meetings, the whispered phone calls late at night, the gifts he sent. Everything about the relationship made her feel like she was in control. But by the time summer arrived, she realized she wasn't. Reddick had started pulling away. He wasn't as available as before. His responses became shorter, his excuses more frequent. He was busier, he claimed, too caught up with work to see her as often as he used to. Celaya recognized the signs immediately. He was losing interest. The fun had started to fade for him, and soon, she knew, she'd be replaced. Maybe not by another woman, but by his life, the one he had never truly been willing to leave behind. That wasn't going to happen, not without consequences. At first, she tested him, small acts to see how far she could push. She threatened to show up at his office unannounced. He laughed it off, told her she was being reckless. She brought up his wife, asked him how much longer he planned to keep up the charade. He dismissed the conversation entirely. The final sign came when she asked him directly, when he was planning to leave Jalia. Reddick didn't even try to sugarcoat his response. He told her he had no intention of leaving. That wasn't part of the deal. Celaya hadn't expected those words to sting as much as they did. She wasn't in love with him. Not really. But she had convinced herself that she meant something to him. Now, it was clear she was just a secret, one he could discard whenever he saw fit. That's when everything changed. She wasn't going to be erased that easily. If he wasn't going to give her a place in his life, she'd force him to. Her first move was subtle. She sent him a picture of them together, a simple reminder that she had proof of everything. He responded with a short message telling her to stop playing games. She sent another text the next day, this time making it clear. She wasn't going to be ignored. Reddick didn't respond at all. That silence told her everything. Celaya had always been the kind of girl to push boundaries, and this time was no different. She just didn't know that the man she was playing with wasn't someone she could manipulate. Nazir Reddick wasn't the type to be threatened. He had spent years keeping his public image spotless, maintaining control over every aspect of his life. He wasn't going to let some 20-year-old girl ruin that. By the first week of July, things escalated. Celaya wasn't just sending messages anymore. She was making moves. She found out where Jalia worked and left a handwritten note under her windshield wiper. "Ask your husband about me," it said, written in careful, deliberate handwriting. She knew Jalia would ask, and she wanted to see how Reddick would handle it. When she didn't hear anything back, she did it again, this time leaving a small rose with the note. She wanted him to know she was serious. She wanted him to feel the panic she had felt when she realized she was being tossed aside. Reddick felt it. He saw the shift immediately, the change in the way Jalia looked at him when he walked through the door. She hadn't said anything yet, but she knew something was off. The tension was there, and Celaya wasn't done. She found out where his kids went to summer camp. She didn't approach them directly, not yet, but she made sure she was seen. She lingered nearby just long enough to be noticed. She wanted Reddick to know she was getting closer. That's when the first real warning came. She woke up to a single message from an unknown number. "Stop." No threats, no explanations. Just that one word. She knew who it was from. But instead of scaring her, it only pushed her further. She had his attention now. What she didn't realize was that she had just signed her own death sentence. This wasn't about love, not anymore. This was about power. For months, Reddick had held all the control, deciding when they could meet, how far things could go, when it was time to pull back. She had let herself believe she had some say in the relationship, but now it was clear. She had never been anything more than his secret. A distraction. And if she didn't fight back, that's all she would ever be. She had one more move left, one that would force him to acknowledge her, one that would make sure he could never erase her. On July 12th, 2021, she went to someone who could make her story public. She reached out to a journalist at the local newspaper, someone who, as fate would have it, had a direct tie to the very man she was trying to destroy. Omari Reddick, a part-time writer for the local newspaper, was Nazir Reddick's cousin, and without realizing it, Celaya had just walked into a trap. She met Omari at a coffee shop near the courthouse, thinking she was about to change everything. She laid it all out, how she and the sheriff had been involved for months, how he had promised her things he never followed through on, how she had been leaving messages for his wife, and how she was done being ignored. Omari listened, nodding, taking notes, asking the right questions. Then he asked for proof. Celaya didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages. The photos. The call logs. She had everything. She had spent the past week gathering it, making sure there was no way Reddick could deny the truth. Omari glanced at the screen, barely hiding the tension in his jaw. He asked if she had told anyone else. She said no. Then he asked what she wanted from this. Did she want money? Revenge? Did she just want people to know? She told him the same thing she had told Reddick. She wanted him to face the truth. She wanted him to know that she couldn't just be erased. Omari told her he'd look into it. He said he'd reach out soon, that she should stay quiet until then, not tell anyone else. As soon as he left the cafe, he called Nazir. Less than an hour later, Celaya received another message from the same unknown number. "We need to talk. Now." This time she felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of something bigger than herself closing in. She thought she had won. She had no idea she had just sealed her fate. Their usual meeting spot wasn't a motel or some out-of-town diner. It was a desolate stretch of road just outside the city limits, an area used mostly by truckers passing through. They had met there plenty of times before, parked under the cover of darkness, away from prying eyes. But this time was different. This time she was walking into something she wouldn't walk out of. At 9:45 p.m., Celaya pulled up to the meeting spot. There were no streetlights, just the glow of the moon casting shadows across the empty highway. It was the kind of place where no one would hear you scream. Reddick's black Chevy Tahoe was already there, parked a few feet from the tree line. He was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, his face unreadable in the dim light. She hesitated for just a second. Something about him seemed off. She had seen him angry before, seen the way his jaw clenched when she pushed him too far. But this was different. This wasn't just frustration. This was calculation. Still, she got out of her car. Reddick remained still as Celaya approached, waiting until she was close enough before responding. The confrontation was brief, but tense. Investigators later determined that Celaya had refused to back down, making it clear that she had proof and that the truth would come out. There was no recorded struggle or prolonged argument. Instead, Reddick reacted swiftly. He stepped closer, and before she could react, his hands were around her throat. The struggle lasted less than a minute. She fought, clawed at his hands, kicked at his legs, but Reddick had 40 pounds of muscle on her and years of training on how to subdue a person. He didn't just choke her, he crushed her windpipe. When her body finally went limp, he didn't let go right away. He held on a few seconds longer, just to be sure. Then he stepped back and looked down at her, the girl who had thought she could beat him. Now she was nothing but a problem to get rid of. And that's exactly what he planned to do next. He knew the area well. This stretch of road was rarely patrolled, and at this hour, there wouldn't be any passing cars. He had chosen it for a reason, but there was still work to do. The first step was removing anything that could place him at the scene. He searched her pockets, took her phone, and shut it off. He wiped down anything she had touched, careful not to leave any trace of himself behind. Then he dragged her body toward the back of his Tahoe and lifted her into the trunk. His uniform was damp with sweat, but there was no panic, no hesitation. Years of working in law enforcement had trained him how to stay calm under pressure. He wasn't just covering up a crime. He was controlling the narrative. His next decision was a calculated one: dismemberment. It was a gruesome act, but it served a purpose. A full body could be identified too quickly. A scattered one. That bought him time. He drove 10 miles out, deep into the rural backroads where no one ventured at night. There he used a hunting knife he kept in his vehicle, a tool he had used many times before, but never like this. He worked quickly, methodically, his mind focused on the task. The body was no longer a person. It was evidence that needed to disappear. Once he was done, he placed the remains into separate trash bags. Some were buried in shallow ditches. Others were tossed into the river. By the time he was finished, Celaya no longer existed in one place. As he drove back toward town, he went over his alibi. He had been home all night. No one had seen him leave. His phone records would show no unusual activity. He had made sure of that. By sunrise, he was back in his bed, his uniform gone, his hands washed clean. The only thing left was to wait and see how long it would take before someone noticed she was missing. He didn't expect it to be quick. But he had underestimated how much noise Celaya's disappearance would make. On July 13, 2021, at approximately 8:30 p.m., a call was made to the county sheriff's office by a concerned friend of 20-year-old Celaya Moore. She had not been seen or heard from in over 24 hours. Calls and messages to her phone went unanswered, and she had missed work that morning without notifying anyone. According to her family, this was highly unusual. By the following morning, a missing person report was officially filed. Detectives began retracing Celaya's last known movements. Surveillance footage from her apartment complex showed her leaving alone around 9:30 p.m. on July 12th. She appeared to be in a hurry, wearing casual clothing and carrying her purse. That was the last recorded sighting of her. Interviews were conducted with friends, classmates, and family members to establish a timeline. One of the first key pieces of information came from a close friend, who disclosed that Celaya had been in a relationship with a married man. The friend was unsure of the man's identity, but mentioned that Celaya had felt like she was being pushed aside and had recently started taking steps to expose the affair. Another breakthrough came from a journalist at the local newspaper, who revealed that Celaya had reached out 2 days prior to her disappearance. She had allegedly spoken to one of their part-time reporters about a story involving a high-ranking official in law enforcement. That reporter, Omari Reddick, had not published any article, and when questioned, he claimed that he had not pursued the story because Celaya never followed up. Detectives noted that Omari Reddick shared a last name with Sheriff Nazir Reddick. Though they were cousins, Omari insisted that he had no further involvement and had not reported anything to Nazir. His phone records were pulled to verify that claim. With growing suspicions that Celaya's disappearance was tied to an influential figure, investigators looked at her phone records. The data revealed that her last known call was received from an unknown number on the night she vanished. The location of the call pinged off a cell tower just outside city limits, near an isolated stretch of highway. By July 15, 2021, a search was launched in that area. The location was mostly rural, consisting of abandoned structures and trucker rest stops. It was a difficult terrain to search, but the efforts paid off. Less than a mile from the highway, a black plastic trash bag was discovered near a tree line. Inside the bag, investigators found human remains. At that moment, the missing persons case officially turned into a homicide investigation. The human remains discovered near the highway were transported to the county medical examiner's office for identification. DNA testing was expedited, and on July 16, 2021, the results confirmed what investigators feared. The remains belonged to 20-year-old Celaya Moore. The autopsy report provided critical forensic details. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to strangulation. There was no evidence of sexual assault, and toxicology results showed no drugs or alcohol in her system at the time of death. Additionally, post-mortem dismemberment was evident, meaning the victim had been deceased before being mutilated. With the case now classified as a homicide, Detectives re-examined Celaya's personal life, focusing on the married man she had been involved with. Through further interviews with friends and co-workers, investigators received two consistent details. The man was older and someone with authority. Cell phone records continued to be a crucial piece of evidence. Investigators subpoenaed Celaya's text messages and call logs from the days leading up to her death. Her messages revealed growing frustration about the relationship and multiple attempts to force a confrontation. A particularly alarming text sent to a friend on July 11, 2021 read, "If something happens to me, just know I didn't go quiet." Among the call logs, one number stood out, a restricted number that had contacted Celaya late on the night of July 12, 2021. The phone pinged near the crime scene at the time of the call. Investigators traced the restricted number to a burner phone purchased at a gas station 30 miles away, just days before the murder. Surveillance footage from the store showed a middle-aged black male purchasing the phone wearing a sheriff's department jacket. The next major breakthrough came from traffic camera footage near the crime scene. Reviewing footage from the night of July 12th, investigators spotted a black Chevy Tahoe with government plates driving toward the isolated highway at 9:57 p.m. The vehicle was not seen returning until after 11:30 p.m. Records showed only one person in the department owned a black Chevy Tahoe with government plates, Sheriff Nazir Reddick. At this point, circumstantial evidence was building, but it was not enough for an arrest. Investigators needed physical proof connecting Reddick to the crime. Forensic teams returned to the crime scene and expanded their search radius. Less than 200 yards from where the first remains were found, they uncovered another trash bag. Inside were bloodied clothing items, including a shirt and a pair of latex gloves. A DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Celaya Moore. The gloves contained two distinct DNA profiles. One belonged to the victim, the other belonged to Sheriff Nazir Reddick. With DNA evidence, cell phone records, and surveillance footage linking Reddick to the crime, investigators prepared for what would come next. A warrant was issued. The sheriff was about to be taken into custody. On July 18, 2021, at 6:15 a.m., a team of state investigators, accompanied by the county deputies, arrived at the home of Sheriff Nazir Reddick with an arrest warrant for first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and abuse of a corpse. Reddick was taken into custody without incident. His wife, Jalia Reddick, was present at the time of the arrest and visibly shaken. She had reportedly been unaware of any developments in the case prior to that morning. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he immediately requested an attorney and refused to answer any questions. With Reddick unwilling to cooperate, investigators laid out the full case against him. Cell phone records placing him near the crime scene at the time of Celaya's disappearance. Traffic camera footage showing his government-issued Chevy Tahoe entering and leaving the area where the remains were found. DNA evidence from the gloves recovered near the crime scene, linking him directly to the body disposal. Burner phone purchase footage, identifying him as the person who likely arranged the final meeting with Celaya. Prosecutors were confident they had enough for a conviction. As investigators built their case, a new piece of evidence surfaced: Jalia Reddick's statement. Shortly after her husband's arrest, she voluntarily came forward with information. Jalia admitted that in the weeks leading up to Celaya's disappearance, she had begun receiving mysterious messages and anonymous notes. The first few she dismissed, but as they became more personal, she confronted her husband. According to her, Nazir denied everything and told her that someone was trying to set him up. He told her to ignore the messages, and she believed him. Jalia also recalled the night of July 12, 2021, the night Celaya was last seen. She told investigators that Nazir left their home around 9:30 p.m., claiming he had an emergency call. He returned shortly after midnight and went straight to shower. The next morning she noticed that his work boots were missing. Jalia's statement corroborated key details in the timeline, further undermining Nazir Reddick's claims of innocence. With Reddick refusing to speak, investigators turned their focus to building the final trial strategy. The motive was clear. Celaya had been pressuring him, threatening to go public, and had unknowingly exposed the affair to the wrong person, his own cousin. With a strong forensic case, a witness timeline, and a clear motive, the prosecution believed a life sentence was inevitable. Nazir Reddick, once the most powerful law enforcement officer in the county, was now an inmate awaiting trial. By March 2022, nearly 8 months after his arrest, Sheriff Nazir Reddick stood trial for the murder and dismemberment of Celaya Moore. The prosecution presented a meticulously constructed case, beginning with the affair itself. They detailed how Reddick had pursued a relationship with Celaya, how he had manipulated her, and how, when she threatened his reputation, he took the ultimate step to silence her. They outlined a clear chain of evidence: cell tower data placing him at the crime scene, traffic footage confirming his black Chevy Tahoe was in the area that night, DNA evidence found on the gloves discarded near the remains, burner phone purchase footage linking him to the last communication with Celaya, testimony from Jalia Reddick, confirming that Nazir had left home at the time of the murder and discarded his work boots the next day. The prosecution emphasized the brutality of the crime, arguing that the dismemberment was a cold, calculated effort to destroy evidence and delay identification. They painted Reddick as a man who believed himself untouchable, a man who had spent years enforcing the law but thought he was above it. Reddick's defense team attempted to discredit the forensic evidence, arguing that DNA alone doesn't prove murder. They suggested that Reddick may have had contact with Celaya that night but didn't kill her. They also pointed to the lack of a murder weapon. The hunting knife used to dismember the body was never recovered. Most notably, they suggested an alternative suspect, claiming that Celaya had other relationships, and one of those individuals could have been responsible. They hinted at possible involvement from a jealous ex-boyfriend, though they provided no solid evidence to support this theory. The trial lasted 4 weeks, with the jury hearing over 30 witnesses, including forensic experts, digital analysts, and Celaya's family and friends. In the prosecution's closing arguments, the district attorney reminded the jury of the facts. This was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of control. When Celaya became a liability, Reddick did what he had to do to make sure she never spoke again. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. Nazir Reddick was convicted of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and abuse of a corpse. With sentencing scheduled for the following month, Reddick showed no emotion as the judge revoked his bail and ordered him into immediate custody. The sheriff who once stood for law and order was now a convicted murderer, stripped of his badge, awaiting the final punishment for his crimes. On April 18, 2022, Nazir Reddick stood before the court one last time to receive his sentence. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum penalty, arguing that the brutality of the crime, the abuse of his power, and his complete lack of remorse warranted nothing less than life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before the judge made the final decision, Celaya Moore's family was given the opportunity to speak. Her mother, Latrice Moore, addressed the court first. She spoke of Celaya's dreams, her ambition, and how her life was stolen over a man's selfish need to cover his secrets. She described the agony of waiting for answers, the pain of knowing her daughter's body had been discarded like trash, and the anger of watching a man who had sworn to protect people turn into a predator. Her father, Maurice Moore, was more direct. He called Reddick a coward, a monster who used his badge as a shield, and said that no prison sentence could ever compare to the suffering his family had endured. When given the chance to speak, Reddick declined. He offered no apology, no explanation, just silence. The judge did not hesitate. Life without parole. With that ruling, Nazir Reddick's fate was sealed. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, stripped of his power, stripped of his title, and with no chance of ever walking free again. Meanwhile, Jalia Reddick filed for divorce immediately after the conviction. She left the state with her 2 children, cutting all ties to her husband's name. Celia Moore's story became a cautionary tale about power, control, and the deadly consequences of secrets. Her family launched the Celia Moore Foundation, a non-profit organization aimed at helping young women recognize the warning signs of toxic relationships, especially those involving power imbalances. Even behind bars, Nazir Reddick remained silent about his crimes, refusing all interviews and never admitting to the murder. But the evidence, the verdict, and the life sentence made one thing clear. His power was gone, and justice had finally been served. Celia Moore trusted the wrong man, and it cost her everything. If you found this case disturbing, subscribe for more. Because in the world of true crime, there's always another dark truth waiting to be uncovered.